Happy Easter to all of you from the Czech Republic. Remember the Czech traditions. On Monday, we will all go about and be hit by this stick from the man if we don't give them any eggs. So we have already prepared all of them. Hello, welcome everybody to week 11. I wish you all a very happy Easter. I hope that you will be able to celebrate even if the situation is as it is right now. Here in the Czech Republic, we're going to celebrate online, so on Google Hangouts and things like that. We're going to be using these technologies. Why not? I would like to thank you all for the great Google collaborative work that you did this week. It was really, really great for me to watch all the videos and the pictures that you posted, and we will keep continuing about this subject. I think it's very, of course, actual and necessary also that we keep talking about this also in relation to our course. This week, what you will do in the Google Collaborative document is that you will have kind of like a field trip replacement. You will be doing a virtual tour, which we would have done in real, of course, now during our field trip, which would have been this week. You will learn a lot about our most favorite president, about the president who was present here during the Velvet Revolution, so Václav Havel. And we got the access actually to this course from the Václav Havel library directly. So we can thank them for that. And then you will have a participation question, which will be in relation to the case study, which we would normally study in class this week. Because right now, in this time of the course, we really do a lot of case studies. So we're going to be doing some of those the best way that we can. Okay, but let's right now do a little review of the midterm exam so that you know what it was actually about, where maybe you made some mistakes. And then we will go directly to the online course for this week, which is going to be about cultural identity, about suffering of identity, and we will slowly introduce our term for the next week, which will be the multicultural society, and we'll speak about identity issues and things like that. Okay, let's go. So here we are right in the midterm exam. So this is question 1. Here the correct answer was number 1. So the study of psychological processes of members of a certain culture and the way that culture shapes us. So here a lot of you did a mistake because you chose the other definitions. Well, they are kind of the same, but a little bit different. It's actually the definitions of transcultural psychology and intercultural psychology. Yeah, so in cultural psychology, we really study mainly processes of members of a certain culture and the way that it shapes us. Yeah, so it was kind of a tricky question, I admit that. But as I told you, actually, if you would have noticed, any one of you, the correct answer was always the first one. Yeah, so here we go, question 1. So here, most of you answered that it was the language that was the most interesting for you. So that was really interesting for me, that the language actually shapes you that much. Many of you also mentioned some other concepts, so thank you for that. It was really great to listen to what you liked. Then we had the quiz. So here, of course, you had to speak about the... Oh, sorry. So in question number 3, I needed you to define in your own words what is the concept of cultural transmission by Kallis, Sforza, and Feldman. So here I really needed you to speak about vertical, horizontal, and oblique transmission and to explain it a little bit. Some of you got that right, some of you just forgot to mention these terms, but mainly it was stated correctly. So in the question 4, this was quite surprising for me that some of you messed up the dimensions actually with the universal requirements. It's really not the same. So here you had to choose the correct definition. Some of you messed it up a little bit. So really, yeah, this was identity, gender, hierarchy, virtue, and truth, just as we studied it in the first course. I show you the correct answer here. Yeah, so here you have the correct definitions actually about these answers. So there were some answers which were supposed to mix you up a little bit, like linguistic relativism, for example. That was, of course, an answer which was not attributed. So I made it a little bit tricky for you, I admit. So then here we had the study of Geber and Dean. Again, here you did you mixed it up a little bit because the study of Geber and Dean focused only on comparison of infant development norms in the different cultures, but then later it was like the grounding foundation for parenting modes and cultural variance, attachment, and all of that was actually generated by this study, but it was not actually the object of the study. Yeah, so again, it was really only the first answer that was the correct one. Here, who is the founder of the theory of social representations? Well, of course, it's Moscovici. Yeah? Ivana Markova, she's also somebody who's studying social representations,
but she didn't invent the concept, like she's not the founder. And then the other two ones, well, those of you who study psychology, they know them. Wilhelm Wundt, one of the founders of psychology, Sigmund Freud, I don't think I have to explain him. So of course here, this is true. Yeah, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is trying to explain how language may shape our thinking. That's the linguistic determinism and relativism theory, so this was completely true. And here in question 8, mark at least 5 universal requirements that we need for any society to function. Well, here you messed up a little bit with the linguistic dimensions, the cultural dimensions. It's not exactly the cultural dimensions. Of course, they're a little bit parallel, but it's not the same thing. So it had to be like control of disruptive behavior, communication, economics, and all of these things, a cleared set of rules, for example. Yeah, the things that we really studied when we spoke about social behavior. Now, what is the main problem in social behavior amongst different cultures? That we morally judge behavior that is unknown for us. Yeah, the others, of course, are prevalent as well, but mostly what is going on is that we judge the behavior that we don't understand. And it's an unconscious process. You are not really aware of that, but you think, well, what they're doing is weird because we're doing it this way and that's how it's right. Here, question number 10, you missed it up a little bit again with the personality dimensions, with the big 5. So it's really 2 different concepts completely. This is what we spoke about when we spoke about IQ and EQ. So it's really on the personal level, emotional awareness and management, and on the social level, social emotional awareness and relationship management. All the other things that you wrote down, like empathy or technical intelligence and things like that, or the 6 types of intelligence. It's very good that you know that, but it was not really the question, But anyway, I gave you some points for it. I was trying to be kind. So on this question, you all did very well. You defined it very well. What was important for me to know is that national character is not the stereotypes, like the funny video that we showed each other in the class. And the personality, of course, is a set of long-lasting traits. So most of you mentioned that, and that was very good. So what are the display rules? So these are the ways that emotion is regulated in a different culture. That's what we studied last week. That's the expression, the amplification, masking, and all of these things. These are display rules. So it was again the first answer because it was defined by Ekman, by Paul Ekman, the one who is actually the true personality between Dr. Lightman. So this question, open-ended question, what is acculturation? I really wanted you to describe it in your own words because the exam was done before we really studied acculturation in depth, but that was done on purpose because we spoke about acculturation so many times. So here you have really the academic definition of what acculturation is, but it was fine if you just described, well, acculturation is what we went through when we were in Prague because we were confronted with another culture. And I just wanted you really to understand what acculturation is about. So here, which literary personality is meant to draw the most precise portrait of the Czech national character? It's the good soldier Švejk by Hašek. The character Jara Zimmermann is invented. So of course, the good soldier Švejk probably didn't exist like that himself, but he was present during the time and he was observed by the author. And he really portrays and he really shows how Czechs function, how they really are. And as I told you, we're still considered to be the Švejks in Europe. So this is really what is the most character of Czech Republic. So here, question, what is the difference between Western concept of intelligence and the primitive concept of intelligence? Again, it was the first answer which was correct. So the primitive societies associate a certain concept or situation by emotional states. This is really the biggest difference. All the other answers are just incorrect or even mean and do not reply at all to that question. Like the Western societies are simply more intelligent than primitives. That's exactly what we were trying to show in the course. That is not true. So some of you confused the answers a little bit here, but really the main difference is that they associate the concept by emotional states. So this week we continue to speak about acculturation, but in a little bit of a different context. So what are we going to speak about today? We'll do both of the courses actually today. So we speak about the concepts of me and us, and we will do a narcissistic view into culture. You will be surprised about what that means actually, the narcissistic view into culture. We'll speak about the false self and the suffering of identity. Again, we'll take a little bit of a different look into the chameleon effect. Who am I and where do I actually belong? and what can happen if acculturation doesn't go right. And the case study will be subject of your participation question this time. So, what is actually my culture? We have spoken and done that a lot of exercises on that topic. Let's just sum it up a little bit. It's the addition of social representations that create the sense of our shared identity in the process of transmission, sharing, and redefinition. So it means that my culture contains an auto-representation of myself. It tells me what I am and what I'm not, and it also tells me what we are and what we are not. And we will study that in order to better understand it. We will study that on a very specific case study. I told you that I worked in an NGO when I was in France, and I was in charge of helping a group of immigrants from Georgia integrate into the French society. So I had a woman there. She was about 50 years old, and she was from Georgia. So Georgia is a very specific country. It's a small country with a large cultural maintenance, and they are very proud of their culture. Generally, it's little villages that are in between the mountains. It's a country which was occupied by Russia for quite a long time. Their neighboring countries are Armenia, Turkey, and Azerbaijan. And their main city is Tbilisi. So here you have a little video to understand Georgian culture so that you can really have an insight and understand what this culture really is. So they are very, very traditional. Women roles are very clearly defined. So for example, women are supposed to really look like women. In some of the traditional villages, women are even forced to really wear long skirts. And their position is, of course, to be a good wife, to be a good housewife, to have children, to cook a lot. They're very connected with their nature around them. They're very proud of their nature, of their mountains, and of their good wine. There is a very strong sense of community, which means that they stick together very much. And as I said, they have a very high cultural maintenance, so which makes the immersion into a new culture, of course, a little bit difficult. Because as I told you previously in the last course, the higher the cultural maintenance is, the more difficult might be the immersion, because they don't value the immersion that much, actually. And so what do they say? If you don't belong to a culture, you are nothing. You are like a seed without a ground. And this is something I would like you to retain, because although it is a very traditionalistic view, and although you can say that it's a view that is against the multicultural society and intercultural mind and things like that, it does have an impact on people who actually have no cultural identity, which we will be studying when we will be speaking about extremism and about terrorism in the world. And this will be our subject of the next week. So remember that saying. Yeah, I had a Georgian friend. He's a rugby player, because Georgian men are very strong and very big. So they actually have a very good rugby team. And he always used to say that he cannot understand people who do not belong to one culture and who find themselves to be multiculturals. Because for the Georgians, it's not possible. Like somebody who doesn't have a culture is considered to be even spineless. Yeah, a person who can adapt to different values, which is really strange. So who was this Natasha? She was a woman who was about 50 years old. She used to be actually, okay, this is an inside information. She used to be one of the wives of the mafia boss in Tbilisi. Yeah, the mafia is still very present in Georgia. So she had a very high social position. And now suddenly she found herself in the situation of an immigrant. So it was pretty difficult for her. Family values were very important for her. So, for example, in Georgia, the children stay with the family, even for a very long time. Even if they already have children, they still stay there. So, father and mother are very respected. They are very religious at the same time. They are Orthodox. So, this also plays a role in how they view family, for example. They are very proud of the Georgian culture and of their music, of the way that they live. So, whenever they come together, they will gather around the table, and the woman, this is about the food, the woman is actually supposed to present a table full of foods to the people that are visiting them in order to show to the people that she welcomes them, that she's happy that they have come around and things like that. And then they have this guy who will be like the coordinator of the social event, and he will say, okay, now we are going to drink to the good health of this person and that person. And then they play songs and they sing quite a lot. So this is Georgian culture, just one glimpse of it. Yeah, They love to play music, to sing, to tell stories and things like that, and to eat really a lot. This is something that's very important there. Also, if you have money, well, you show it. Yeah, this is a little bit the same as in the Russian culture, as I told you. People are not afraid to show, and it's actually a good thing to achieve and to have money and to give money, to share it with the other people from the community. So that also means that if you have money and you invite somebody over, well, you're supposed to make like a really big fancy dinner with a lot of things on the table. Another thing that's very important, and it's important in the case study for Natasha, is that women are supposed to really take care of their looks. So all the Georgian women that I met in France were, they had a lot of makeup, they were wearing a lot of jewelry. Usually they were wearing very feminist clothes, like not feminist, sorry, like feminine clothes. So that means that they either had like dresses or skirts and really things that reveal your femininity. And if the girls are young, it's okay for them also to wear like something which shows their body a little bit, but not mini skirts. Yeah? It's quite a Puritan culture too. So this is just for you to understand what Natasha came with. Yeah, what was her cultural baggage? Yeah, this is who she was. This is the culture that she was integrated into. So culture holds a representation of me and them. The identification of the individual with the shared meaning of his or her culture is called the soul of the nation. Yeah, like we said, all of the history, the rituals, the traditions, the habits, they create a common identification and frame the individual and what he internalizes as us. Yeah, we will have that in the reading for this week also, but in the linguistic reading that we had, it was the 4th of July. What it means for you Americans is something so specific, and it internalizes your meaning of you as a nation and where you belong in terms of that group. And when we can meet with other people from the same cultural frame, well, we call it sharing, and it's pleasure. Yeah, it's us. Yeah, it's like when you reunite with other American students, like one student was doing a research on bonding of strangers when they are in another culture. And well, why do we tend to bond with people from another culture? Because we can share the same values, of course, the same social representations, and the same things have the same meaning for us. So there is no need to talk too much. We just know that the other person is going to have the same frame as us, as we, and therefore the sharing becomes a pleasure. It's easy to share with people because you know that they understand you. So this is the ethno-psychoanalytic view. When I told you that we will be switching views every time a little bit. So in the convictions, rituals, and traditions, the unconscious mind plays the biggest role. It structures our psychic. Yes, the object of connection and categorization is what we call the collective unconscious. The objects we connect with of our culture have therefore a narcissistic value for us. It means that we are narcissistically bound to those objects, yeah, because they are actually a part of us. So what could be objects of narcissistic attachment, for example? So it's just a few, maybe even funny examples that I show you here, but very true ones. And the more that you know the cultures, the more you will be able to really see that it is really like that. Like the baguette for the French. Or another thing that could be very narcissistic for the French is their liberty of speech. Yeah? When we will be speaking about the different terrorist attacks that France has suffered during the last 10 years, you will see that the terrorists attacked actually these values of the French, not the baguette, but they attached the liberty of speech. Yeah? They attacked actually a journal like a journal office where there were true journalists working, and then the people went out into the streets and they were holding up pens in order to show that their value of liberty of speech is still intact, that it means something for them. Then of course, what does it mean for the French, the baguette? It doesn't mean only the bread itself, but it reminds them of pleasant moments, of smells. Yeah, smells play a very big role in our memories and in our construction of the unconscious. Sharing and tastes, yeah, we recall that from our vertical transmissions, for example. You all have some foods that you that you have connected with your mom and with your grandmother. Yeah, this is also narcissistic attachment to cultural objects. So the beer for the Czech is not only that he's proud of the fact that we have the best beer in the world, but it also reminds him of the moment of relaxation after work or sharing with his friends. And that was the same for the Georgian wine and the music. Yeah, it reminded them of who they are, because it reminded them of sharing formal time with family and taking care of intense emotions. Yeah, so Georgians can become very emotional when it comes to their songs. They really like to sing a lot. So these are objects of narcissistic values and connections of pleasure that we make with them. You can think about which kind of objects these are in the US culture. Usually we had very nice discussions about that with the students in class, but well, you can think about it for yourself. So here is just a reminder of the model of unconscious of Jung and how it is actually structured, what it means, collective unconsciousness. This is all that we have discussed so far. So all the symbols, all the traditions that mean something, the social representations. Yeah, and these actually are there you can find some explanations for our behavior. And then they are, of course, practiced by our family, underlined by our religion and by society in general. Yeah, they become internalized values and, of course, internalized bands also in terms of our education. So if we speak about all of this now, what is actually a cultural difference? Yeah, what does it mean to have a cultural difference? How do you actually come about to define something as a cultural difference? How does it happen? Before you go on in the video, just think about it. So culture constructs itself through and by the confrontation with the difference of another culture. Yeah, it's exactly the process that you went through when you were in the Czech Republic. You would have never actually maybe realized some of the things of your own culture if you wouldn't have been confronted with the difference. Like you all described, the typical situation that you are too loud on the public transport. Well, you would have never experienced that if you wouldn't have come to Europe. So cultural difference is born when individuals with various backgrounds meet. And this is actually the basis of acculturation. And what is strange is becoming unknown, unusual, and threatening. And again, we are coming to the cultural dimension of uncertainty avoidance. Yeah, so here you see how this is all connected. So we have the tendency to adopt a hostile behavior. This is, again, something natural. When we come into an unusual situation, our natural tendency will be we will be kind of worried, maybe not worried, but a little bit more attentive than we would be if we would be in our own culture. And how do we actually experience this cultural difference? So from an ethnopsychoanalytic view, it's comparable with the child protective mechanisms when he meets a stranger. So for those of you who have maybe done babysitting, you will know something about the term of the anxiety of the 8 months. This is when the baby starts to realize that he's not one with his mother, and he will start seeing actually the face of his mother, and when he sees a strange face, he might suddenly start crying. And people tend to take that personally, but it's not because the baby doesn't like you, it's just simply because he recognizes that you are somebody else, and his natural reaction will be to feel a little bit anxious about that. And there are 4 ways how we experience actually the strange. Yeah, the first one is déplaisir, is hostility. That's something that you probably experience too. It's the opposition of the outer and inner reality to what brings me pleasure. So this is really the phase, if you remember the curve that we studied, the acculturation curve, this is really something that occurs after the first few days and weeks spent in the culture. When you really start realizing that there is something different, you will be actually opposed to that in some way. My representations do not correspond or are not comparable to those of my environment. So there you will start to think, well, what's going on? Why can't I share the same values with the people around me? What's going on? And it becomes a rejected value, a feeling of non-plaisir. Yeah, like being loud on a tram, for example. You experience that as something relaxing and nice when you could laugh out loud with your peers in the tram without any problems. But suddenly you realize that it's not possible anymore on the trams because people are staring at you, and that's not nice. And you start thinking, well, why is that like that? And you experience something that we call opposition of the me pleasure. Yeah, and this is what Natasha experienced. So she experienced that many times, and it became very hard for her, actually, these situations. First situation was when she was invited by a French woman to her house, and there was a situation that she could not anticipate at all. So the French women are very feministic and they're very emancipated. So for them to spend 3 hours in the kitchen preparing a meal for somebody is absolutely something that they just wouldn't do because they worship their time. So for Natasha, she expected that if a French woman invites her to her house, she's going to present her a full table of food. But she didn't do it, the French woman. She just told her, okay, come in and we just have some potatoes and meat for dinner so you can help me scrub the potatoes. And Natasha, coming from the culture that she came from, thought it was an insult. And she thought, well, this French, I'm not going to use the word that she said, but this French lady, she just thinks that I'm some poor woman from the East that's going to scrub her potatoes. But for the French woman, what it meant was that she just wanted to engage in a social interaction with her, because for French women, it's totally normal to just ask a woman to help you prepare the dinner. It's like an act of friendliness, like to say, hey, let's come, we prepare it together. And meanwhile, we just drink some wine and we just eat some chips and we just have a good time. But of course, Natasha was not able to do anything like that. Another thing that she experienced in the opposition of the me pleasure was when she walked out down the street and a man would come up to her and ask her how much does she cost, because he thought that she was a prostitute because of the way she was dressed and of the way that she wore her makeup with all of her golden chains and pearls and things like that. And of course, this was very, very horrible for her. Yeah. So she couldn't understand that at all. And of course, my role in that situation was to make her understand again that she should not take these situations personally, that it's simply because of the cultural difference. And of course, she was experiencing a lot of suffering because of that. Yeah, she felt the loss of integrity that is comparable to the separation anxiety from the mother. So really, you see how deeply these feelings can actually touch us. Yeah, how far deep down it can go. And we have to reorganize our internal and external relationships. Yeah, we have to find another way of functioning. So Natasha actually, she felt this big suffering because she was saying, I can never actually integrate into that society. I don't understand their values. I don't understand why the women here don't dress like I do. I don't understand why if they invite me to dinner, they behave like they behave. And she felt really very lost. And she felt a situation of non-connection. And what was the worst, and what can really happen, and what I have experienced quite a lot of times, is the feeling of persecution and depression. Yeah, she kind of felt persecuted. Maybe some of you even experienced that too while you were riding on public transport here in Czech Republic, that you felt like everybody's looking at me, everybody's watching me. Yeah, and that you started to feel this like a suffering, or it started to make you really slightly depressed. Yeah, and if you would have known that you would have to stay here, like Natasha did, because for Natasha it was final. She was going to stay in France because she couldn't go back home. And so she really started to feel a depression. She started to feel like she can't ever connect to this society at all. Yeah, because she felt like the French have different values about food, and they really don't care about their looks as much as they do in Georgia. The culture is completely different. They don't like to get around the table and sing together. When they gather, they speak about completely different topics. And she also could not understand why the French do not value the family in the same way as the Georgians do. So the French children usually go off to university. They don't live with their parents that long of a time. They usually like to live far away from their parents, but they, of course, still like to meet them. It's just a different way of organization of family values, actually. But this is really what she felt. She felt like I can never connect to these values at all. And so what do you have to do in order to be able to actually adapt into this culture? Well, you have to construct another me. Yeah, you have to think about the concept of alterity. You have to confrontate yourself with the difference. And this is where it becomes difficult, because this is called the process of adaptation, but it's not always as easy as it seems. So you have to constitute another me. Yeah, you have to become someone else, someone that you haven't been before. Like you described, you suddenly became a little bit less loud. You just suddenly behave differently. And this is really the process where we start to construct another personality. One can even say another personality. So the organization of alterity and experimenting separation, non-connection, or even loneliness, depression. And the other me, what does it do? Well, he stops doing some things, he stops saying some things, and he starts doing things differently. Yeah, so this of course takes some effort because it's difficult to change the habits that you have been used to. Yeah, that's very difficult for anybody. Of course, the older that we are, the more difficult it gets. But it's difficult even when you are a young person, yeah? And if you don't experience anything like that, you will never really understand what these people have to go through. Now, after your experience in Czech Republic, you will be able to understand. And then what happens is that you actually kind of leave the oneness of your culture, yeah, and you have to create another us. So meaning you have to find some connections with the culture and with the people that are around you. Just like you were trying to find some connections with the Czech people, yeah, although they are different from Americans, but you were trying to. You're trying to define some kind of another us. The necessity rises up to recognize one's values and adapt to the different culture, to the norms and rules and behaviors of that culture, to the shared and accepted ways of conduct in family and society. Yeah, and this is where the concept of the other us is born. So you have to integrate. And this is not only the case for when you move from one culture to another. This can be if you change businesses, for example. Each business now today has its own business culture. And if you move from one company to another, you can easily find yourself like, well, in the company that I was before, they didn't do this like that. They did it like that. And you can easily find yourself in feeling disconnected from the others as well, unless you adapt and you create another way of acting and another way of finding your access to the group, right? This can also be the case if you find a partner and you are about to meet his family or his friends. It's exactly the same situation. And then what happens is that you find some kind of points of attachment to the new culture in order to be able to live there. Yeah. So this sounds really a little bit like a fairy tale, and this is what Natasha was actually trying to do. And by gaining more cultural understanding, you can actually do and go through this whole process of creating the other me, but it's not always as easy. Yeah, not everybody manages, not everybody wants to, not everybody is motivated to, and not every time it's really possible. It really depends on how your culture of origin is and how your welcoming culture is. Yeah, it depends on many factors. But her acculturation was actually quite satisfying. It went quite well. She was trying to adapt to other ways of behaving, but it was causing her major problems. Yeah. So at the beginning, she was always telling me that she can understand the values of the French society, but it's not like what she believes in. It's not what she likes. Yeah. She said, I'm not myself when I behave like that. So we were trying to reconstruct her and her new self in respecting her own limits of still